Hi, I'm Bill Hamblin, and I'm trying a new experiment of doing book reviews on YouTube. Today I'm going to take a look at Bart Ehrman's book, Forged. Bart Ehrman is a very distinguished professor. He is James A. Gray Distinguished Professor at the University of North Carolina. He specializes in textual criticism of the New Testament and also in early Christianity. He's quite famous and well regarded among scholars and has written a number of books, all of them well received, and many of them best-selling popular books as well. Ehrman begins in his introduction with a discussion of his spiritual and intellectual journey and his background in that regard. He, as a young man, was an inerrantist evangelical, quite fervent, went to undergraduate school at Moody College and tried to go into Bible studies with the hope of understanding, demonstrating the Bible is true, and using it as a means of propagation of Christianity. He eventually went to Princeton in graduate school, and after studying the Bible there, came to the conclusion that the Bible was not inerrant, and therefore not inspired, and therefore Christianity was false, and basically had a spiritual crisis, abandoned Christianity, became a secular agnostic, but continued on with his biblical studies, and eventually becoming a professor. His crisis is described in his book on page 5 like this: I came to think that the Bible could not be what I thought it was. The Bible contained errors, and if it contained errors, it was not completely true. Now, this is interesting in this regard because what we see here is Ehrman approaching the question of inerrancy. That is to say, the real question, the underlying question that Ehrman doesn't deal with is, can the Bible be inspired? Can it be Scripture? Can it be revealed from God if it contains errors? Basically, Ehrman doesn't seem willing to engage that idea. He spent his life, in a sense, trying to demonstrate that the Bible is not inerrant. And he's done so because the Bible is not inerrant. His conclusion from that is that the Bible is false, or at least it's not authentic. Parts of it may be true, but fundamentally it doesn't reveal a message from God. I think that's an erroneous conclusion to draw from the data, and we'll discuss this more as my review continues. But basically, Ehrman doesn't engage the possibility that there can be errors in Scripture. He seems in a way to be still enthralled to his inerrantist assumptions that he had, that the Bible, if it's not inerrant, must be essentially false. Now, as Ehrman formulates the question, I think he's mistaken. The options then are not inerrant or false. The options are inerrant, kind of the evangelical position, or a text that is revealed and inspired even though it contains errors, or a text that has no inspiration, there is no God, a secular approach to the Bible. It seems to me we have those three options, and Ehrman doesn't really engage the middle position, which is personally my own position. Now, Ehrman goes on to describe a couple of unusual Christian beliefs that existed in the first century and even into the second century, and basically these are related to the question of the development of Christian Scripture and the question about is Christian Scripture fraudulent. First of all, Christians believed that the Jewish canon of Scripture, that is the Hebrew Bible, what we call the Old Testament, that it was not closed, that it could be added to. And the revelations of Jesus, the teachings of Jesus, and the apostolic leaders and prophets, all of these people could add Scripture through revelation from God. That's an important point to understand as we move further. This is kind of unique to Christianity at the day. Judaism did not believe as a whole that new Scriptures could be added to the old Scriptures. Second thing is that, as Ehrman describes it on page 8, authoritative truth could be found in apostolic writings. That is to say, because they are revealed from God, they are authoritative. And the apostolic writings are contained in the New Testament, along with some non-apostolic writings as well. So those are important ideas, and we'll see as the book develops that these play an important role here. Now, the fundamental question that Ehrman raises in his book is the question of pseudepigraphy. Pseudepigrapha means a text which has a false epigraph or a false heading. It is falsely ascribed to an author, or it is not really what it claims to be. Now, there are, in fact, as Ehrman says, there are a large number of pseudepigraphic Christian texts. All scholars agree on this point. And in fact, early ancient Christians, 1st, 2nd century, and even 3rd and 4th century, agreed that there were false, fraudulent Christian texts. Nobody's debating this. My concern with Ehrman is essentially how pseudepigraphic texts and canonical texts interact and interrelate, and what is the nature of early Christian writing. For example, did they write fraudulently? Did they make forgeries? Did they write anonymously? Did they write pseudonymously, that is, under a assumed name? There's a wide range of issues here, and Ehrman, in fact, discusses those in his first chapter, which I'll get to later on. He claims that the motive for writing fraudulent pseudepigraphic texts was that early Christians wanted to have their ideas taken seriously. If they weren't an apostle, people wouldn't take them seriously. And so they wrote in the name of an apostle so that their ideas would be more widely accepted. I think that there's some problems with that formulation which Ehrman makes. First of all, most early Christian texts were anonymous, or they were written in the author's real name. So we need to note that. There are fraudulent texts, but most early Christian texts don't fit into that category. The other thing to note is anonymous texts can't be a forgery. That is to say, if you're writing anonymously, you are not pretending to be someone that you're not. For example, the Gospel of John, in fact, never mentions John as its author. That attribution of the Gospel to John comes later in Christian history. The Gospel of John can't be a forgery in the name of John because it doesn't claim to be that. Now, they may be mistaken as to whether or not it was written by John, but that's a different question. The second issue is that early Christians believed in continuing revelation. That is, they believed God could reveal new scripture to people. And a revelation can't be a forgery. What I mean by that is, if God revealed to you an idea, maybe you're delusional and think God revealed it and he really didn't, but that's not a forgery. That's just, a delusion. Forgery has to be where you know that God didn't reveal it to you and you pretend that he did, or you know that the book was not by Peter, but you pretend that it was. That's forgery. If you believe that God revealed something to you, you may be delusional and he didn't, but it's not a forgery. It's simply, a psychotic, delusional book. The other thing to note is that the rise of forgery in early Christian history coincides with the rejection of continuing revelation. That is, when Christians began to reject the idea that God could reveal new scripture to them, then they begin to turn to pseudepigraphy, that is to say, writing in the names of earlier apostles, precisely as Ehrman says. But it doesn't really occur until the Christians as a whole begin to reject continuing revelation. What that means is that forgery as a phenomenon is directly associated with the failure of prophetic, inspired revelation of new scripture. So Ehrman's question that he raises in the book is it possible that any early Christian forgeries made it into the New Testament? That is to say, are any of the books now in the canonical New Testament, in fact, forgeries by Christians? He thinks that there are some. I'll look into those ideas in detail, but that's his fundamental question, and he believes the answer is yes, absolutely. Ehrman's goal then is to demonstrate that the New Testament is, at least in part, a forgery. It's fraudulent. And that's important to note. His goal is to undermine the authenticity of the New Testament. He's done this in various ways in other books, but in this particular book he is trying to say how these texts are fraudulent, or at least some of those texts are. And that's Ehrman's basic set of ideas, and we'll continue on with Chapter 1 at another time. Thanks for listening.